Hi, my name is Kathy Turner. I have been collecting China dolls for much of my life, and I also deal in dolls online with my shop Vertu Doll on Ruby Lane. But I'm here today to talk to you about one of the most prized and sought after China dolls for all doll collectors, something any doll collector would love to have under their Christmas tree, and that is the dolls of KPM. I want to start out by doing a little chat about the history of the company. And I have to first of all give a tip of the hat to Christiane Grafnitz, who really did the amazing research on this company. A funny little side story is when she first reached out to KPM to ask to look into their archives about the doll making of the company, they insisted that they had never made any dolls. And she had to send them photos of the dolls that she had access to prove to them that they actually had made dolls. And then they said, oh, well, maybe we made a few. Okay, you can come and dig through our archives. And then, of course, it grew from there, and they discovered that they had, in fact, had about a decade of doll production in their history. But going back to the beginning of the company, it was about 1751 when a German gentleman named Wilhelm Wegerle, who was a wool merchant actually, he managed to obtain the formula for the porcelain making from a Meissen worker. He had to pay a good chunk of money for it as well, because formulas for porcelain at that time, they called porcelain white gold. It was just incredible piece of technology in Europe at that time, and it was held in great secret, these formulas, by the factory arcanist. But he managed to get it and set up the beginnings of the KPM factory in Berlin, and under the auspices of the Prussian ruler, Frederick the Great. And he had some success for a while, but his business floundered, and the royal family decided to take it over in 1763, and that's when it became officially KPM under the royal auspices. In fact, the royal family was their biggest customer. They bought about 25% of the output of KPM at that time and for many decades thereafter. The company was actually owned by a succession of royal family members. In fact, I think under about 7 different emperors, until it was taken over it became a German company by the government for a time. So that's just the brief history there of that. And then we get to the dolls themselves, and you have some examples here in front of you. They started making them in 1840. That was when the first orders were discovered in their records. And they continued making them for about a decade until about 1850. The last order they found in the records was 1861, I believe, but they haven't been able to identify the description of those dolls. So we really only know of about a decade of production. Total production was about 66,000 over the entire course of time they made the dolls. And that sounds like a lot, but when you compare that to a company like Hertwig, who was making literally millions of dolls yearly, that's actually a rather small output. So it's no surprise that these dolls are hard to find right now. And they were of the highest quality. So let's just take a look at one of these ladies here. And you can see the markings inside. There's a red mark right here. It's kind of faint, which is an orb. And then there's this one's double marked. It has another blue mark that says KPM with a scepter. I think the red orb mark was one of the first ones they were using during this period, but because it has the other mark, then that doll would be dated by that mark, which was, I think, was in use until 1844. So for this one, you can say this one was probably made sometime between 1840 and 1844. And then we look at how she was made. And you look at this, I guess you could call, it's kind of like an encased ponytail of some sort. Now you look at the undercuts, and we were discussing amongst ourselves earlier how these were made. You can't take a mold and pop that out of a two-part mold with an undercut like that. This portion here has to be made separately and applied. And under discussion with people who are making dolls now, we find that this probably took about 7 molds to make this doll. 1 for the front half, 1 for the 2 parts of the top, 2 for the 2 parts of the back, and then 2 parts for this. I think that's a total of 7. So these were not simple dolls. And then the other thing to think about is the painting. KPM has very distinctive painting style. If you look at the face of that doll, they have a distinctive red line that's painted not in the crease of the eyelid, but along the upper edge of the eyelid. Their eyes were blue and not only blue. Their hair was brown and only brown. They typically had 3 large sew holes front and back. These are all characteristics of these dolls made by this company that you can use to help you identify them. They also did not put any white eye highlights in the eyes. Now we talk about that one having the characteristic painting, and then we go to this one, which doesn't. And we're like, what is going on? Because this is a KPM doll. She is marked inside, and I'm going to flip her over to show you that. She has the KPM mark with a scepter, which again would have dated her, maybe up to 1844 or so. But her eye painting is distinctly different. So what was happening is that sometimes the company would sell independently at auction or at like warehouse type locations away from the factory. They would sell blanks or even perhaps seconds. And these might be bought by painters who worked either for KPM or independently for other porcelain companies perhaps, and they would paint them as they wished. So this one was a KPM product, but it was painted by somebody outside the factory to give it that distinctly different appearance. And then we look at her hairstyle, and you see that projecting bun. And again, we have a piece of hair that is not made in the mold with the original head, but is made independently and then applied. And one of the questions we have is, how many actual molds or models did they have? Did they take a fairly simple, basic model and then start, adding these hair features? They weren't actually maybe different models so much as they were applying the hair to differentiate them. And then we also have a boy, because if you have girls, you need boys. And he also is marked, and he has the later mark, which would be towards the end of the 1840s, up to 1847 to 1849, I believe. But he still has the 3 sew holes front and back. He still has the distinctive facial painting that the other original doll I showed did. And we were talking about the hairstyles and the applied hair. And here we have a complete doll, smaller size. Now she has ringlets, which were probably made independently and attached. And if you turn, I'm going to turn her around, and you can see how she does not even have a bun in back, but she looks like she has a place where a bun could have been attached. And she is on a French kid body, so it's not unusual to have German heads being put on French bodies. They were, after all, adjacent countries, so that's not uncommon at all. The other thing about the way they were made is these dolls were all pressed into the mold. Let's take a look at one. Though they're relatively smooth, You can see they were pressed into the mold, including all the added parts, and they also typically are glazed inside. When dolls are made nowadays, they're typically poured in molds. And speaking of dolls made today, this is an example of a reproduction doll. And I'm sorry, Michael, the name of the artist?
Carl Armstrong.
Carl Armstrong. And I have to say he's very talented. This is one that is not, this is sort of a blooper doll because he's not happy with the glaze on this one, but he's getting very close to the appearance of the originals. And he has his, of course, as one should, he is marking his wares. But his are poured into the mold. And as he was describing to us how these were made and how the modern porcelain is in an electric kiln cannot be fired as at high a temperature as the porcelain of these antique dolls were, which were fired under wood or coal at a much higher temperature. So you get a different, I don't know if I can ting it and you hear it.
Flat.
Yeah, and then we take this one.
Sharp.
Very different sound that they have. And also talking about how they were made. Again, this is a in process, so to speak, reproduction by the same artist. And this shows the stages of the painting. These dolls have to be fired multiple times to get the painting of the facial features and so forth completed.
Up to 7 times.
Up to 7 times.
And each time you fire it, you are taking a chance of
Absolutely.
Your work going in the round file.
Yes, something could explode, break, or there could be other, incidents of the kiln. So yes, I'm sure that they had a lot of loss.
Oh, there is. Today there is.
Today there is, and even more, I would imagine, back then. So even though there were something over 66,000 of these dolls produced, I can't even imagine how many went in the chuck pile.
Oh, yes.
And these are survivors that we can enjoy today. And anyone who has one of these dolls can only call themselves fortunate. KPM is one of the few companies that is continuing in production today still. And they still continue to make the highest quality products. So I'm going to say Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays.
Thank you, Kathy, for sharing these wonderful dolls and all your research. We really appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.